So given the back and forth with this U.S. District Judge and the administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act, does the president plan to send new and additional flights of Venezuelan gang members now designated as foreign terrorists from the U.S. to El Salvador or elsewhere? Can Americans expect to see those flights sometime soon?
Americans can absolutely expect to see the continuation of the mass deportation campaign that has been successfully led by this president, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, and also our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Since you brought up the judges, I would like to point out that the judges in this country are acting erroneously. We have judges who are acting as partisan activists from the bench. They are trying to dictate policy from the President of the United States. They are trying to clearly slow walk this administration's agenda, and it's unacceptable. As the President said last night, we will continue to comply with these court orders. We will continue to fight these battles in courts, but it's incredibly apparent that there is a concerted effort by the far left to judge shop, to pick judges who are clearly acting as partisan activists from the bench in an attempt to derail this president's agenda. We will not allow that to happen. And not only are they usurping the will of the president and the chief executive of our country, but they are undermining the will of the American public, tens of millions of Americans who duly elected this president to implement the policies that are coming out of this White House.
And then one more question. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said yesterday that he was united with Democrats in working against Americans who, quote, their attitude is, I made my money all by myself. How dare your government take my money from me? Or I built my company with my bare hands. How dare your government tell me how to treat my customers? What is the president's response to this, given his upcoming tax agenda and need to work on Capitol Hill?
Well, we certainly hope that Democrats all of a sudden are for more money in the pockets of the American public. The president has made it incredibly clear that he is committed to tax cuts. He is committed to passing a big reconciliation package later this year, ending no taxes on tips, taxes on overtime, no taxes on Social Security for our hardworking seniors. And we encourage everybody on Capitol Hill to support that when it comes to the finish line, especially Democrats who clearly need a boost from the American public right now. Their approvals are at an all-time record low. Thanks for being with us, Katie, about that. Jackie.
Thanks, Carol. What options does the president have to, he says he's going to follow court orders. He wouldn't defy a court order, but he's raised these concerns about these judges acting in such a partisan way. What option does he have to ensure that his agenda continues to move forward while this is ongoing and the judges appear to be trying to just block and delay and impede?
Well, you're right. They are trying to block, delay, and impede. This is lawfare. The president is no stranger to it. He faced it in his campaign, and this is a continuation of the lawfare that President Trump faced as a candidate, and he's now unfortunately facing as a president. Clearly, these partisan activists in the judicial branch didn't get the memo on November 5th when the American people overwhelmingly re-elected this president to continue with mass deportations. So White House counsel and the Department of Justice are working on this. They're appealing these cases, and we will continue to use the full weight of the White House counsel's office and the president's team of lawyers to fight this in court, because we know we will win, even if we have to go all the way to the Supreme Court.
One more on TDA. Andy McCarthy said in an interview with Hugh Hewitt, he certainly agrees with what the president is trying to do with the Alien Enemies Act, but he's not sure that the law is completely on his side. He cites some previous Supreme Court rulings dealing with enemy combatants in wartime, says that even they have a right to challenge their detention in court. He raised concern also that while TDA has been designated as a terrorist organization, these individuals hadn't been prosecuted for terrorism. So my question is, will the president ask Congress potentially to declare war on these cartels for the invasion that he's talked about so that he's on stronger legal footing?
Well, we absolutely disagree with the legal opinion of the individual that you mentioned. We would not have moved forward with this if we didn't believe the president. This was within the president's executive authority to continue with this mass deportation effort under the authority provided to him under the Alien Enemies Act. And when you read the act, as I did last time at the podium, a predatory incursion is absolutely what has happened with Tren de Aragua. They have been sent here by the hostile Maduro regime in Venezuela, and the president, immediately upon taking office, designated TDA as a foreign terrorist organization. And under this act, it is within the president's authority to deport these terrorists. And anybody trying to defend these terrorists who have now been sent off of American soil should talk to the families of the individuals who these heinous monsters have killed and have raped. If you talk talk to those families, they are so heartened by the president's decision to take tough action and to use his executive authority, something that no other president has been willing to do, because President Trump does what he says he's going to do, and he is deporting these foreign terrorists from American soil to secure our homeland, and he's within his rights to do that.
Very quickly,
Jennifer.
Very quickly on Tesla, there's a website that's trying to dox Tesla owners across the country and saying they're only going to take down personal information when people show that they've sold their cars. What's the administration going to do about that?
I haven't seen that website, but we certainly think it's despicable, the violence that has taken place against Tesla, the company, its employees, and also just Americans who have chosen to drive an electric vehicle. Many of them are Democrats, by the way. Democrats were big supporters of Tesla and of electric vehicles until Elon Musk decided to vote for Donald Trump. So we would like Democrats to also come out and condemn this heinous violence that we have seen, and I believe the Attorney General has said she's investigating these incidents as acts of domestic terrorism.
So President Trump standing firm on his promise to get migrant gang members out of our country despite pushback from a U.S. district judge.
He actually said we shouldn't be able to take criminals, killers, murderers, horrible, the worst people, gang members, gang leaders, that we shouldn't be allowed to take them out of our country. Well, that's a presidential job. That's not for a local judge to be making that determination.
So the administration has until noon today to respond to the judge's questions on the deportation flights of the alleged members of Tren de Agua, the Venezuelan gang. They are now in El Salvador. TDA is one of the gangs and cartels the State Department designated as foreign terrorist organizations. Here to discuss National Security Advisor Colonel Michael Waltz. Colonel, thanks so much for joining the program.
Good to be with you.
So tell me, I don't know if a lot of Americans realize, but as a former Green Beret, you know this. We've targeted these cartels before. The president really doesn't need to declare war to go after them, right?
No, that's right. And Lawrence, let's go back in time a bit. I can remember when people were trying to arrest Osama bin Laden and were trying to arrest Al-Qaeda and debating whether they had the evidentiary standards to get them through due process here in the United States, which is a very high bar. We need to perhaps start thinking about these terrorists like what they are, which is terrorists. Unfortunately, we had 9/11 to begin thinking about Al-Qaeda like the terrorists that they are. Tren de Agua has been labeled a terrorist organization. They are no different than ISIS. They maim, kill, torture, create mayhem and chaos on our streets in the United States. And I think if you had some of those, tattooed, shaved head men labeled ISIS, then we wouldn't even be having this debate. So this is about a wholesale shift on what a terrorist is and how they should be treated in the United States, how they should be treated when they're attacking our soil and when they're violating our sovereignty and when they're terrorizing our citizens. And of course, that is going to present an Article 2, Article 3 in the Constitution conflict. But really, that's what this is. And this is squarely under the commander-in-chief's authority to keep Americans safe. And I'm telling you, that's how most Americans see it.
So, Colonel, you would never give those operation details to a judge if you were going after Osama bin Laden. They're obviously trying to get you to give that information over about these terrorists. Now, I want to move on to the big call with Putin yesterday. Apparently, it was a 90-minute conversations. There's some reports out there that said that he kept the president waiting. I don't think that's true based on my sources. What can you tell us?
Completely false, garbage, fake news. This is between two heads of state, a major call. There's, sometimes some technical difficulties. The call started on time, and it lasted for a very long time. And both presidents covered a lot of ground, from the future of bilateral relationships, keeping, stabilizing the region, to solving this problem in Ukraine, ending this war, stopping the killing. They went into some operational details of the fighting. They went into a big picture on how to implement the ceasefire, prisoner exchanges, people that are being detained. They covered a lot of ground. But I can tell you, Donald J. Trump does not sit and wait for an hour for any head of state. But look, this was this was an important historic call that only President Trump could pull both sides together. He's going from one side to the other. Our negotiators are going from one side to the other. And we are driving both sides closer and closer. Lawrence, even the NATO Secretary General of NATO said, President Trump, you broke the logjam. And everybody agrees now. It's not if the war ends. We're debating how the war ends.
So real quickly, Colonel, before I let you go, you're in a unique position because you did used to be a Green Beret. You've kicked down a lot of doors of some bad guys, but you've also had to work with some bad guys for the interests of America. So what did you make of the call? Do you believe that Putin was an honest broker? Could you believe what he said when he promised the president that they may be able to come to an agreement here?
Well, it's not a matter of whether you necessarily believe. This is trust but verify. Yeah. This is tough negotiation. Putin's a tough character. We have no illusions about who we're dealing with. But both sides, it's in their interest to end the killing, to end the massive loss of lives and treasure and material, and play this forward a year, 2, 3 years. You know, how does this end except World War I style grinding warfare with World War III escalation consequences? It's in all sides' interest to stop it, and that's what we're driving towards.
We begin with this Fox News alert. President Trump is standing strong against the growing list of lawfare liberal lawsuits against him. One of the fights is over his effort to deport hundreds of alleged Venezuelan gang members, the worst of the worst. Many convicted of violent crimes and here illegally. I'm Harris Faulkner. You are in the Faulkner Focus. Judge James Boasberg gave the Justice Department until noon Eastern today. He likes those noon deadlines. Okay. Anyway, he wants the DOJ to hand over more information about those deportations, and he is the same judge who ordered those planes to turn around in the sky after they left the U.S. The president did not hold back.
He actually said we shouldn't be able to take criminals, killers, murderers, horrible, the worst people, gang members, gang leaders, that we shouldn't be allowed to take them out of our country. Well, that's a presidential job. That's not for a local judge to be making that determination.
All right. He also posted this. If a president doesn't have the right to throw murderers and other criminals out of the country because of a radical left lunatic judge wants to assume the role of president, then our country is in very big trouble and destined to fail. Republican Congressman Tim Burchett threw his support behind the president.
I stand with President Trump. I think it's a complete overreach by this judge. I think it's political overreach by the left. This is an act of war by these countries. These people have come in and they've come across our border illegally. What would happen if 14 million people swarmed the border at one time, yet it was spread out over 4 years? 14 million people. What you consider that an unlawful invasion? It's an act of war.
You know, I've been paying attention to something. This is senior White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich, and you just heard Congressman Burchett say this. The number has crept up because now they're reaching out, Jackie, and they're finding out how many more people came across our border unvetted, some of them violent. I mean, it's amazing how far away we were from the truth, apparently. Jackie?
That's right. And, you know, to that point, Harris, the administration right now is not barred from using the Alien Enemies Act to continue to do these deportations, but they're supposed to notify the court before they use it in the future. So anyway, the administration has till noon today to provide information on specific movements that plane made, rejecting the claim that the judge's orders did not carry any force once that plane was outside U.S. territory. President Trump clearly not happy with what he sees as the judge's effort to override his presidential authority, but he was making clear last night he will operate within the bounds of the law.
Would you defy a court order? Because we all know that was outrageous.
I never did defy a court order.
And you wouldn't in the future?
No, you can't do that. However, we have bad judges. We have very bad judges, and these are judges that shouldn't be allowed. I think at a certain point you have to start looking at what do you do when you have a rogue judge. The judge that we're talking about, you look at his other rulings. I mean, rulings unrelated, but having to do with me, he's a lunatic.
Yesterday, Trump called for Judge Boasberg, his impeachment. In a rare statement, though, Supreme Court Justice John Roberts pushed back, saying for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. President Trump appearing not to take that statement personally, though.
Well, he didn't mention my name in the statement. I just saw it quickly. He didn't mention my name, but many people have called for his impeachment, the impeachment of this judge.
Now, these alleged TDA gangsters were sent to a supermax prison in El Salvador, but yesterday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio threatened new, escalating, severe sanctions on the Maduro regime if Venezuela does not accept its repatriated citizens. ICE says there are about 258 Tren de Aragua gang members, which would likely be placed into removal proceedings if they are transferred into their custody, Harris.
All right, Jackie, thank you very much. Katie Trzaskowski, constitutional law attorney and former federal prosecutor, is with me. Look, you heard from that report. The Aliens Enemy Act is not banning sending these bad guys back to their countries. The president and his team just have to notify the court. Why?
Well, even that requirement seems like a bit of an overreach by the judge. The Alien Enemies Act is essentially a unilateral power of the president to remove people who fall under the provisions of that act, as according to the president, from our country. And it's something that the Supreme Court has looked at and said that the courts do not have any sort of power to second guess. There are only, from my reading of the Supreme Court's previous interpretations of this, there's only some limited questions that a court can ask regarding the jurisdiction and whether somebody actually falls within the designated group. But certainly, this is a national security issue at the end of the day. Look, the president has that authority.
Katie, we're doing something that the Biden administration didn't bother to do. We're vetting the people before we send them out. They didn't even vet the people when they were coming in. So this is something that we know is happening. That's how we know so much about these guys. I mean, face recognition, they're working against people who are trying to help them, so they've got to go into communities, do all that great law enforcement, banding up of agencies and all of that. So if all that work is being done to round these guys up, why can't the judge just look at the file and say, yeah, A through F, yeah, those guys need to get out of here? But my big question is, how does a district court judge trim the powers of a United States president when it comes to getting out people who are dangerous to the citizens of this country?
Well, I absolutely agree with you. I think this judge has well overstepped his bounds, but they really can't theoretically do that. But the problem is that because the case starts at the lower level here, this judge is saying this particular law, the Alien Enemies Act, has never been used to target a specified group. It's only been used against citizens of countries against whom we've been at war. And so there's a question about, does this actually apply here versus if you have people here illegally, even criminals, there is immigration processes and due process that is required to get a removal order. They cannot just be summarily removed, which under the Alien Enemies Act, the president can order their removal without any due process whatsoever. And that's the gripe, essentially, that they're not getting due process, even if those things are true, that they are criminals.
Well, and please, don't misunderstand. I'm not pushing against what you're saying. This is not my opinion. This is fact. This is common sense. This is the president of the United States. And because a district court judge says he's never seen it applied this way, there are a lot of things I haven't seen, but it doesn't mean that they don't stand.
Well, that, I think, is the big picture problem here. When you have these, quote-unquote, unprecedented situations and you could interpret the law one way or the other to defer to the executive authority and you're choosing to resist the agenda, to resist President Trump's actions, you are undermining that. And what for what? To keep these people in our country? I mean, that's absolutely absurd at the end of the day.
I wish you were in the courtroom to ask that question. Like, what is the point of all of this? What is your goal to
protect due process for these people when the same people are never in favor of that when there's people accused of, let's say, like a Me Too crime? These are the same people. It's the hypocrisy is overwhelming.
Wow. Well, the numbers tell the story of the deluge of liberal lawfare against President Trump. Look, you just heard Katie saying it. I mean, it is what it is, and it is really obvious. In fewer than 2 months, judges have filed 15 injunctions halting Trump policies. That is more than President Biden's entire 4-year term and both Presidents Obama and George W. Bush's terms. Remember, they were both in office for 8 years each. President Trump also faced a whopping 64 injunctions in his first term. 3 of those came now, again in this one, just yesterday. One indefinitely blocked Trump's order banning transgender people from serving openly in the U.S. military. Another stopped the EPA's attempt to end $14 billion worth of grants to climate groups. A third halted the administration's efforts to dismantle USAID in the push to cut waste. President Trump is not going to stop.
Look at the fraud that we've caught. We've caught so much fraud, so much waste, so many employees that never showed up to work. I guarantee you, we will be appealing it. We have rogue judges that are destroying our country.
So, Katie, it's obvious what they're doing. And look, I know you're in law. You don't want to think of judges not being fair, but they're not.
Well, when you have the choice to interpret in a way that furthers the president's agenda or not, and you're making the choice to resist that and to make it so difficult to achieve these very noble goals, it's like these courts are saying you have to spend money on wasteful things that the American people want nothing to do with. You must give foreign aid to all of these other places instead of taking care of things here. This is essentially what the big picture is. I think a lot of these judges lose sight of the forest for the trees. And yes, there is a question about the extent of a president's authority, whether it's statutorily or constitutionally derived. And you have to look at that in certain cases. And, you know, there are processes to go through. But when there's a valid interpretation that furthers the executive's authority, I think that that needs to be respected.
Well, look, if the judges, if the attorneys, if, you know, I mean, the ACLU is even getting involved at one point with the Mahmoud Khalil situation, the protester who was with groups aligned with Hamas, that he was leading those protest groups on the campus of Columbia University. I mean, you've got it coming from every angle, and you can't ignore the politics of this. So whose side are the lawfare pushers on? It's like a drug for them.
Well, yeah, and with the Khalil situation, of course, now they love the First Amendment. But when anybody spoke out against COVID, of course, they lost their jobs, they lost their livelihoods. I mean, these are the picking and choosing of, you know, the law to further that purpose. And that is lawfare, because that's clearly inconsistent across the board here. And so everything is meant to undermine President Trump's agenda.
Yeah. One target, as you say, President Trump. It's not even on behalf of the American people, because these decisions don't keep us safe.
Well, it's contrary to the wishes of the people, from what we know.
All right, let's bring in Jay Town now, former U.S. Attorney from Northern District of Alabama. Thank you so much for joining us. So please do tell us, based on everything you just heard from the White House in that briefing, what you've heard from the president, his administration, where does this go next?
Well, ultimately, nearly all, I mean, this is lawfare by other means. I think Caroline Levitt sort of alluded to that. There's been 129 lawsuits in Trump's less than 60 days of being in office. To put it in further context, in his first term, there were 64 injunctions against Trump. That's more than the sum of George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden's administration all put together. The legality of Donald Trump, President Trump, is absolutely right. It doesn't matter. This is a 1798 law. We're using gobs of the First Amendment right now on your air. That's an even older law. And so the Alien Enemies Act, what the president did is he very shrewdly intertwined TDA with the Venezuela government and as calling it a hybrid criminal state, because Maduro and TDA have joined together in law enforcement, in military. The Maduro government funds TDA to come to the United States, to bring cocaine, to sow discord, to engage in violence. And he has enacted the Alien Enemies Act, declared TDA a foreign terrorist organization, and ordered their removal. That's what the AEA was meant to do. And so the president has acted in his Article 2 authorities. And for a district judge in Washington, D.C., and I hope you'll ask me about all the mistakes this judge has made already, but for a judge to substitute his judgment for the President of the United States or the ACLU's judgment, you might as well substitute the winner of the Publishers Clearinghouse's judgment for the president.
Well, I'll let you share what those mistakes you see the judge has made so far, as you wish. But I'll first play out this sound from Caroline Levitt just moments ago, talking about as we were watching the video there, of these recent ICE arrests, a reminder of the atrocities of these people. Listen.
ICE San Francisco just arrested a citizen of Guatemala convicted of sexual battery. ICE New Orleans arrested a citizen of Ecuador convicted of rape in Suffolk County, New York. ICE Atlanta arrested a citizen of Mexico convicted of assault by strangulation. ICE Dallas arrested a citizen of Mexico convicted of assault with a firearm and rape with a foreign object. And ICE Houston arrested a citizen of Guatemala convicted of indecent sexual contact with a child in Texas. These are heinous criminal alien monsters who the previous administration allowed to flood into our country. And every time President Trump and this team deport one of them, our country becomes safer.
Having just eloquently shared with us your legal perspective on all this and where you see it going next, you hear that and you wonder, how is it possible that there are Americans, people in this country, citizens of this country today, that are fighting to keep these criminals on U.S. soil?
Again, I spent a career in law enforcement, Sandra. My whole life was spent dealing with victims of crime, oftentimes violent crime. And I can tell you that this is what I think underpins and underscores the idea that this is just lawfare by other means. If this was a different president, there would be cheers that these plane loads of terrorists were leaving our country. But instead, there are those who would like to keep them here. And the ACLU has filed this suit, and this judge has entertained it. And it's quite astounding what you hear from political pundits, from people in media, that, for instance, this is what was pled by the plaintiffs in this case, that this is merely a war power. It is not. If there is an invasion or predatory incursion, the president has the same powers under the Alien Enemies Act that he has if there is a declaration of war. And what is an invasion or what is an incursion, that there is no statutory definition. It is purely the judgment of the sitting duly elected president of the United States. And that's just the plain language of the statute. Also, Judge Boasberg has allowed this habeas petition to continue before of him, but the Supreme Court has already told us that a habeas petition is only properly venued in the district in which the plaintiffs are detained. They're not in Washington, D.C. One is in New York, 4 are in Texas. There's a lot of other mistakes as well. It's laden in error. And Judge Boasberg should not even be hearing this case, much less the way he is.
Levitt summed it up, calling them partisan activists in the judicial branch. They didn't get the memo on November 5th when the American people overwhelmingly reelected this president to continue with these mass deportations. Always appreciate when you can join us. Thank you so much.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.